What is push-out? Black girls are being disciplined, suspended, arrested, and pushed out of the K-12 school system at a higher rate than their white counterparts. The documentary PUSHOUT describes the experience of Black girls in schools whose lives are often misunderstood and highly judged by teachers, administrators, and the justice system. The following words will help educators to understand more about PUSHOUT: ACEs score, adultification, criminalization, racialized gender bias. ACEs scores, Adverse Childhood Experience Questionnaire. Some students experience abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, and other childhood trauma. Adultification. Adultification is the assignment of adult norms towards a child. Adults might see Black girls as older and more sexually mature than they really are. Criminalization is to treat someone or their behaviors as criminal, even though they are not violating the law. Racialized gender bias. Racialized gender bias is bias or discriminatory treatment on the basis of race or gender. At alarming rates, Black girls and other girls of color experience discriminatory, disparate, punitive, and unfair treatment in schools. According to the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, Black girls in high schools are 6 times more likely than their white girl counterparts to be suspended, 2 times more likely to receive corporal punishment than white female students, 3 times more likely to be restrained than white female students, and 4 times more likely to be arrested than white female students. Without intentional efforts to combat old ways and norms, institutions reproduce dominant social ideas, hierarchies, and systems of oppression. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Ralph Ellison. Take a moment and really see me. My Black is beautiful. Who do you see? Good afternoon. Thank you for being here and welcome to our panel discussion about PUSHOUT, the criminalization of Black girls in schools. This program is brought to you by a collaboration between Malden Public Library and Malden Community Organizing for Racial Equity. My name is Urga and I will be your moderator for this event. Before I introduce our phenomenal panelists, I would like to say that this space was intentionally created so that we can share our thoughts, experiences, and our personal reflections. The remarks that are made by our panelists are not reflective of the institutions that they work for. I'd also like to provide you with some terms that will be defined in the chat box for your reference. The words criminalization, racialized, gender bias, and adultification. Our panelists will answer questions for about 60 minutes in random order, and then we'll have an opportunity to have a Q&A session that'll be about 30 minutes for our program. And if you do have any questions directly for our panelists, you can do that and enter it in the Q&A section. And I will be asking the audience questions as well to put in the chat. All right, let us begin. Last night, I asked the audience to summarize their reactions to the documentary with one word. Now I'd like to ask our panelists to do the same. Oh, I have to introduce our panelists. We have Juan Guan, Alba Soto, Jennifer Hedrington, Dora Henry, and Eric Henry. Please, if you can tell us in one word how you describe your response to seeing the documentary. We'll start with Juan.
Disheartening.
Dora?
Necessary.
Shocking.
Saddening.
Eric?
Insubordination.
Thank you. And now I'd like you all to briefly summarize the narratives from the girls who were in the documentary for our audience that were not able to possibly watch the documentary. And please do this in 2 minutes or less. We'll ask Juan to share Ariana's story, Jen to share Terriana's story, Laura to share Emma's story, Eric to share Kiara's story, and Alba to share Samaya's story.
So I'll kick it off. Ariana was one of the girls in the video who talked about her experience, or I should say, numerous suspensions from school, really dealing with a lot of trauma in the home. Her father passed away. In addition to that, she had dealt with her home being on fire and also a victim of bullying as well. And so one of the things that stood out to me was the fact that she was constantly getting into fights as a result of being bullied and not really having much support. And, to me, it was a concern because too often we see Black and brown girls, having experiences where they feel like they don't have a solid support system in the school, which I think is really disturbing.
Thank you. Jen?
Yes. So Terriana describes herself as an outcast who struggled to find her way through an emotional maze of middle school and high school. She wasn't getting any support from her family nor the school. With nowhere to turn, she ran away from home and turned to the streets. After an arrest and some time in juvie hall, the assistant district attorney introduced her to Emerge, an institutional re-entry program for girls with the goal to repair their relationship with schools, recover credits towards a high school diploma, and facilitate their enrollment in an institution of higher learning and or permanent employment. It was there that she was encouraged to find another path from confinement to college and career. Today, she has completed 1 year of community college and is working with the Young Women's Freedom Center in San Francisco to help fellow Black girls succeed and not fall victim to the system.
Excellent, thank you. Dora?
So I had Emma's story. Emma experienced bullying in middle school like any other young girl. It left her really depressed, angry, and filled with anxiety. From everything with this, she turned to self-isolation, and you could see small attitude changes in her behavior. Her grades started to drop, and she was constantly being suspended for unnecessary or minor issues, which ended her in a separate school detention. Later, she moved schools, and through that, an all-girls school, and through that school, she was able to find sources and support from all of her teachers and students, and she was able to get back on track. And as of now, she's moving on to 10th grade and doing well.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, Eric, Kiara's story.
Yes, Kiara, like many of the young ladies, had a background, a history of fighting and being bullied. She seemed to, from first grade on, she was the daughter of immigrant parents living in Miami, coming to Miami, Asian descent, Asian parents. She found comfort, or she found a group of people who were supportive of her because of her ability to fight. But then she all later determined that that was not the best way to go, that she could be liked and cared for other reasons. Also, she said in her story that what struck me was that you're gonna fall multiple times before you get on the straight and narrow. And that was a very powerful statement.
Thank you. And Alba, Samaya's story.
Samaya, at the age of 7, she was experiencing being targeted by her teacher. She expressed these issues with her parents, who didn't quite believe that what was going on was truly the teacher, against her. And after a situation where she had an interaction with another student, she was pulled out of the classroom and made to sit outside. And she wandered off into the streets where she contemplated taking her own life. And after wandering into a store where the police were called, and the police did not respond to her being a 7-year-old out in the street because they misidentified her as an older child, and simply asked if she was angry or upset, as opposed to responding by going to help her. After a while, she returned back to the school where she was found, because her parents were called hours later after she was missing for quite a few hours. And after that, she struggled with suicidal ideation, and her parents were able to get her into another school, get her the support that she needed, and really fill her up with the sense of love. And she's now 12 years old and thriving and doing really well in school.
Thank you so very much for summarizing the stories. Now, I would like to ask the audience to take a few seconds to enter in the chat the name of one of the girls' stories that resonates the most with you. Please choose one. And now, panelists, I'm going to ask that you share your personal reflection, concerns, or feelings that you had after you watched the documentary. We'll start off with Thora.
Yes, so as I said earlier, I was overall just shocked. I was at a loss of words, because no one should have to go through that. No girl ever or should have to be going to school and having the problem to face of, wondering next what is going to happen to them in school, a place where you should be learning and where you should be safe. So it was just shocking just seeing this. I mean, you hear the stories, but hearing stories from those specific girls that were just underlooked, it's just a whole new perspective on everything.
Thank you. Alba?
It was very difficult to watch, but at the same time, I feel like having those difficult conversations are necessary for us to be able to recognize that these challenges do exist and to be able to do something, to be able to provide solutions and change the structure that we have of the learning for our young boys and girls so that they feel supported. And also just the idea of really shifting the conversation, because a lot of the conversation about criminalization was very much targeted at boys. So shifting the narrative to talk about girls is something that was lacking. So I do feel like it was necessary to have this documentary and this discussion as well.
Thank you. Juan?
For me, I feel as if there's a lot of work, obviously, that needs to be done. I think about the video yesterday, it still sits on me heavy, just thinking about how more likely young girls are to be referred to law enforcement, 3 times more likely, 2 times more likely than white students to exhibit higher suicide rates. And to Thora's point, I think it's important that Black girls should be able to not only feel welcomed and feel safe, but also have that learning, have that community that supports them, that nurtures them, that engages them in the classroom. And it's not often the case. And, from the video, you've seen where girls were tackled down by teachers, by police officers, et cetera. But I really think at the end of the day, ensuring that no student is made to feel like they don't belong is really important.
I agree. Thank you for that. Eric?
I was more so drawn to all of the stories, but in particular the ones that had the parents in there. And as a parent of a child who is, or children who are, actually truly still in the struggle, I could relate to Samara's parents when they took the stance that, I too was like, teachers are not there to not like you. It's not the teacher's job to dislike you. So what's going on? And you err on the side of the teacher. You tend to give them latitude because, frankly, they should know better. Also, and with over 40% of the households in Malden, there is someone in our household, my wife, who is foreign born. So I also could relate to Kiara's story of the parents truly wanted to have a better life for their children. I just was really, I'm still trying to grapple with the point of how does a 7-year-old contemplate suicide? So we as parents, you try to think that you're providing a better space than what was provided for you, but are you in tune to these things? What am I missing? What am I not seeing? What am I not hearing? Because when I sat here and I watched the video with my daughter, Thora, all my children, but specifically Thora, and she tells me when the word insubordination was mentioned, and that's what the teachers said to me, and I went to several shades of midnight blue. I was heated when I heard those words. So, but then again, how much of it is on me? How much should I be advocating for my child and not being able to just say it's not the teacher, and that's where but suicide. I'm still grappling with that.
It's hard. Thank you. It's definitely hard. Jennifer?
Yeah, so I think for me, it was more on a teacher's end. So I had to question myself, and am I guilty of making our girls invisible, right? Because like someone said, we're so used to hearing these stories about the boys and always looking after the boys. And I question, have I been part of the problem, right? Do I see the girls, right? Am I noticing what's going on? So it just brought a new perspective and, new lenses to what I did.
Thank you. According to the National Center of Education Statistics, 7% of the 4 million teachers in the United States are Black, while Black girls make up 16% of the student population. How could the deficit of Black female educators be a contributing factor in how Black girls are perceived and treated in schools? This question goes to Buon.
For me, it's really about having, it goes beyond having representation, right? And so thinking about, having someone who looks like you, or someone that you can connect with, that can support you, like having that kind of system or structure in place for young girls, I think it's important. But at the same time, I think the challenge with a lot of schools is that we do, although education as a whole, I work in higher ed, and so for me, I see a lot of times they go above and beyond to recruit educators and faculty of color, but at the same time, there's challenges with trying to retain them, and there's also challenges not only to support these educators, but also to support these students as well too. And so, having said that, I think one of the challenges that come into that is thinking about when we look at the curriculum and what's being taught, it's not taught from a multicultural framework, which I also think is a problem as well.
Excellent segue. Jen, would you like to add anything to this?
No, I agree with everything that was said.
Okay, so representation is definitely described as being imperative and empowering for the Black female students. And Juan, like you stated, I think that it's very important for that to happen and for the curriculum to be looked upon as well for some change. Now, do you think that would, having the changes in the curriculum and representation, change the teacher-student relationship? This question goes to Jen.
Most definitely. I think that when a child can either see themselves in the teacher or in what the teacher is presenting, that a relationship is formed, right? So being a Black female educator, I have an easier time bonding with my Black female students. But with that being said, if I'm teaching something, if I start talking about something that has to do with like Asian culture or what have you, even though the Asian student in front of me may not identify with me as a Black female, but now that I'm speaking about something that is relevant to them and I'm opening up myself to understanding their culture and being receptive to, how they see life, that allows a relationship to be formed between student and teacher. So yes, it is important. So it's not, yes, representation, obviously, but in our current situation, it is what it is, right? Though we'd like to change it. But if the curriculum and if we as teachers do our part and start teaching to touch everyone, right? To let everyone know that I see you, that your history, your present is relevant to me and is relevant to our society, then yes, a relationship, will eventually develop between the adult and the child.
I appreciate that answer. And I think that mindset that educators can also learn from students, if and when given that opportunity, also goes a long way. Thank you for that. What has your experience been growing up as a student in the complexion of your skin? Did you experience any racial biases from teachers, administrators, peers, or staff? Eric, you can answer this question first.
I'm of a generation that my parents can tell you that the greatest disservice that happened to Blacks was integration. Integration was was changed from integration to assimilation, and with that, we lost a lot of our professional base in our community. But I am of an age where I had Black teachers, and as a caveat, even smaller number of Black male teachers, but I did have Black teachers. And to sit down and think about it, that my children, they've never had a Black teacher. And I think that there have ever been one male of color in their circumstances. So yes, it is. Times have changed, but I think we should be able to find resources for our children, external or extended resources for our children to try to bridge these gaps for them, because they need those that visual of what success for people who look like them can represent.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Juan.
For me, it was a little bit similar where I didn't really have Black teachers. I attended a Catholic school growing up. However, I was kind of deemed the problem kid growing up, and in reality, it was just really me speaking up and, often getting in trouble because the teachers would look at me as being someone who is defiant, when in reality, I felt like when I participated in class, I was made to feel like I was less than. Combine that with being bullied was also really frustrating experience. And for me, growing up, I come from the background, I come from West African parents where it was like children are to be seen, not heard. And so a lot of the challenges there too is that because of that notion in my mind, which as a young kid, I didn't obviously agree with, but at the same time, when I did try to speak up or I wanted to participate, I would have teachers that would, oh, here goes the troublemaker again, and really say things that would be very devaluing and really harmful to a child's psyche and also to their development. Constantly hearing, here's Miss Problem, here's Miss Issue. And to a point where I had one teacher, tell me that I wasn't going to make it far in life. And so I look at things like that. And even in terms of high school, where, I'm applying for colleges and my advisor would say, you know what, I don't think you'll be good in a 4-year school. Have you thought about this instead? And so I always used to wonder why. Why is it if my grades were fine, but it's just like, why is it that that's the first way of trying to communicate with me that I shouldn't go and excel and do college? And so I really feel like a lot of that played a huge factor, but I didn't allow that to stop me. The problem is there's teachers out there till this day that try to demean or devalue youngsters today and make them feel like, they're a problem, they're a burden, or that they're not smart or capable, which I think is really harmful.
I agree. Would anyone else like to speak up on this?
So mine is twofold, one as a student and then one as a mother. As a student, I live in Lancaster and it's an all-white community. And I went to the regional high school where I was one of a few Black students. And, I tell the story everywhere I go. One of my teachers, I think it was criminology class, took us to the local prison. And while we were waiting for the inmates to come in to have a conversation with them, again, I'm being the only Black student, we're waiting for the inmates. My high school teacher looks at me and says, "Hey, Jen, you might find your high school prom date here," right? And at the time I had, put my head down, didn't know what to say, and no one else knew what to say. But what he didn't realize, what he did for me was he ensured that I became the teacher, right, that I am today, right? He empowered me to make sure that I never made another kid feel the way he made me feel. And then on the flip side, as a mother, like I said, again, I live in Lancaster and I put my kids in private school when they were younger. And I remember we went to a parent teacher conference, and my oldest, it was I think it was just something like, he was kindergarten, something like coloring. And, he's coloring outside the line, and being a teacher, I'm like, what is this boy doing? You can't color outside the lines. And the teacher was like, oh, no, it's okay. He'll be fine. He's coloring outside the lines. And, his letters aren't perfect, but it's okay. I said, okay, maybe she knows best because I'm not used to working with little kids. And then immediately after me, there was another parent with their child, same age, who also happened to have the same name as my son. butt was white. And I happened to hear the conversation she held with that parent. And it was like, no, we can give him extra work. And it's the same issue, coloring outside the line, and his letters weren't perfect, but we can give him extra work. There's some extra worksheets. He can practice his handwriting. And so that was eye-opening for me. And hence why I, found a way to get my kids to go to school in Malden, where it's more diverse. But, I feel like there is, there is this discrimination based on skin color that we need to address. And I think it's something that once we start speaking about and addressing and admitting to it, right, we can make a change in the school system and do better by our kids.
I agree. Thora, could you possibly share the story of your experience with the teacher that we had talked about earlier with the audience?
Yes. So I'm still in school. I'm a freshman, but in my 8th grade year, my homeroom teacher and English teacher, I take time out of my lunch to get extra help for my classes to keep my grades up because, I need the extra help here and there. I'm not always available for after school. So one day I was just sitting with my teacher during my lunch period in history extra help, and my homeroom teacher came storming into the teacher's classroom and yelled for me. She's like, "Thora, where are you?" And I said, "I'm getting, extra help." She knows this. All the teachers know this. But the reason she came was she said, "You need to come in the classroom and sweep." A kid spilled his rice on the floor. And kid spilled his rice on the floor. He was going to clean it up, but she actually told him to stop cleaning the rice and to give me the broom to sweep up his mess. She said it was my responsibility to clean up after, another student that spilled his food. And he was willing to clean it. But right after that, I asked really respectfully, I was like, "Excuse me, but I don't understand." I'm like, can you explain, why I should be cleaning his mess? And it was almost degrading at that moment because I'm like, I'm trying to get my education, trying to get my grades up so I could, be successful. But you're taking me out of my own time to clean up someone else's mess. I'm like, I'm not a maid. It's not my problem to clean up his mess. It's not my job. After that, she actually called down the main teacher and said that I was being insubordinate for not cleaning up his mess. And at this time, I didn't know what insubordinate was because I never heard the word used or used against me. I said, "What does that mean?" And then she's like, "Oh, go look it up. You should know what it means." And so I kind of just sat there and stared at her. I was just in such a state of shock. And then I went down to the teacher, and the first thing he said was, "I know you shouldn't be doing this." Or, "I know you, I taught you for years. You shouldn't be acting like this." And then the next thing that he said, which I never thought would ever come out of his mouth, was, "Is there something going on at home? Are your parents being nice to you?" And I was just in such a state of shock. Like, how can you say this? And especially in front of all of your students that are also in the classroom. So here I have half of my grade thinking that something's going on at home or thinking that I'm a troublemaker. And so from that one altercation with one teacher, my whole year just went upside down. I had teachers were tracking me everywhere. Everyone looked at me as, "Oh, when Thora leaves the classroom, you guys have to follow her," or "Everyone has to know where you are at all times." So from that one altercation, my whole year with everything, I lost all my friends from that. I lost everyone I had. My teachers, I only had one teacher that supported me that whole time. And that was my history teacher, which helped me with my extra help. She was the only one that was like, "I got you. You could come talk to me. I support you. I'm here for you." And it was just a lot to go through. Yeah.
I am so sorry that you went through that. It sounds like you were labeled, and then all the other teachers started treating you like that troubled student, and then again being policed in your own school. Would anybody else like to say something? I see expressions
Yeah, I
Ron?
mean, I'm just hearing that and it's just making me think too. And I appreciate Thora just being vulnerable and just sharing this with us in the space, but just thinking about how demeaning that is, right? In the presence of her peers and from in front of others and what that feels like. And I think a lot of times, even with myself working with a lot of college students and have similar scenarios where students are seeking extra help or if they're participating in the classroom. I had one student of mine recently, very active, wants to participate. She's very driven. She wants to get good grades. And she raised her hand, the professor tell her, you can actually stop talking now, literally in front of all of her peers, to the point where now she doesn't even want to participate in class because the professor made that comment to her in front of everyone. And so I think a lot of times too, many of the students that I work with are Black or from Latinx community. And so a lot of times too, you have some professors that would say microaggressions. Another student of mine who submitted a paper, she can write very, very well, well articulate everything. And so the teacher had to question that. The teacher had to question, whether or not she actually wrote her paper. And so it's things like that that is really, harmful and dangerous that, it makes students in particular, it makes them feel like they don't belong. They feel isolated and sometimes can, either have that impact them where they're like, you know what, forget it. I don't want to participate in this anymore. Or, I'm not going to say anything at this point. What's the point anyway? No one's going to believe me. And it's those feelings that start to manifest that also negatively impacts them too. And I think that's the danger with what we saw in the video and also the experiences as well too, is that it creates this atmosphere of like one, mistrust, and low self-esteem and feeling like, okay, well, what's the point? This professor doesn't care or they embarrass me. So now I feel shame. And I think it's a terrible way to, to connect with students or to interact with students in that way.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the next question. Oftentimes, Black girls who are at risk are overlooked because their behavior doesn't fit the traditional narrative of vulnerability. What steps can be taken to change this from continuing to happen? This question will go to Alba and to Jen.
Okay.
So I think the first step is recognizing that different children express their trauma or their anxiety, depression, whatever it is, in different ways. Some ways are visible and some ways are invisible. There are some overachieving students that are really just trying so hard to run away from their hurt. And that overachiever could be dealing with some type of trauma or depression. And those type of symptoms look like people pleasing. Those type of symptoms look like constantly needing to be busy and check off boxes. So it's important to recognize that that person too could be hurting, as well as someone who could be exhibiting different frustrated or outbursts, or really just trying to look to fit in different categories or in different groups as well. And those are like, it's also important to take in the person's culture, right? Is it normal for this person's culture to talk about their home life, to talk about mental health, to talk about their feelings, or to even have feelings? And if it is not something that's typical of this person's culture to do that, then how can we, one, understand that this is a cultural difference, and two, how can we try to bridge that and provide that trust and that sense of support by asking the right questions in the appropriate space so that they can open up and share what is truly going on so that they can get this appropriate support that they need. And in those cases, I think really collaborating with a team, which includes having the parents parents involved, so that the parents can also sometimes get the education that may be lacking in terms of understanding what depression is, what suicide is, and being able to provide them with support that could be helpful for their child.
Thank you. Jen?
So from a different angle, I think that society may intentionally force young girls to not show and not release, right? And, you know, this new thing, like a year or two ago, Black Girl Magic, right? You know, the t-shirts, Black Girl Magic, what have you. And if you think about it, this Black Girl Magic puts on a facade where I have to be strong all the time. I have to be a superwoman all the time. So if I'm in pain, I can't show it because a superwoman wouldn't show it, right? I have this magic that allows me to overcome whatever I'm going through. And I'm going to assume that this Black Girl Magic comes from a good place, but too many of our girls, and, you know, I know a lot of former students who feel the pressure of Black Girl Magic, who are in a state of depression, but I can't show it because I have to be strong for everyone around me. You know, I have to present a certain way because people are depending on me to be that superhero. Right. So I think that we have to be careful when we see, like, you know, Alba said, sometimes it's the extreme, right? Or I have to be doing something, I have to be on point all the time so that I don't show how weak and how scared and how sad I really am. Because if I do that, then I don't fit into that narrative where I'm the Black Girl Magic. I don't fit into that. So I think that's something we have to look at as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just going to share this statistic and we're going to sit with it. The suicide rate of Black children under 13 is 2 times the amount of white children in the same age group. Black girls make up half of that statistic. Very saddening.
Can I say something while we sit with that?
Yes.
I know this is off script, but, you know, as a teenager, I was one of those girls who contemplated suicide. And I don't know if Eric said this while we were taping or not, but I was one of those kids who contemplated suicide at age 7, right? I was suicidal until I think my last attempt, I was like 20 something years old. Right. So, you know, being in just at school age, it's difficult, you know, like I said, I went to an all white high school. It's difficult to try to keep up. Right. I never fit. I didn't fit in. I didn't have the body type because I didn't have the narrow hips. I didn't have the lips. I didn't have the hair. I didn't fit in. So I was always overlooked. And for a kid, you know, it's hard because you want to be liked by your peers. And when you're in a state where no one looks like you, no one understands you. And for me, you know, I tell people I was invisible in high school. I literally wore the same clothes for over a month, waiting for someone to say something. And no one said anything to me. No one noticed that I was wearing the same clothes every single day because I was depressed. But you know, when you're that age, and again, I'm Haitian descent. So mental health, you know, what is that? We don't do mental health. Okay. Go pray about it, you know? So who do you talk to? How do I express that to my parents? Right. How do I tell them that I don't fit in? You put me in the school because it's the better school, but mom, dad, I don't fit in. And I'm not getting the education that you really want me to get. Yeah, they're teaching me ABC, but I'm not learning about me. And what I'm actually learning is to hate me. Right? I'm learning to hate me while I'm being fed this false narrative of me. So yeah, I'm suicidal. So I think that we have to take that into consideration. Like school is a trigger for many people, especially when no one sees these girls, when they're invisible. Like to imagine going through life being invisible. It's saddening, you know? So that's that. Sorry.
Thank you for sharing that. And I actually wanted to add on 2 cents in there as well, because coming from a culture as an immigrant, as a Hispanic, as a brown skinned girl, like mental health doesn't exist. And there are so many times that people miss misspeak about what is depression or what is anxiety and trying to turn it into a situational thing that can be prayed away or that is demonic or isn't necessarily something that we can speak about and we can get treatment for. Because once you get treatment for, there's a label, and that label is something that many parents are afraid of, not to mention the fact that if your child is in therapy, then there's this huge fear that now the therapist is against you, because something that your child can say can now be used against you as a parent, instead of being used as a support and a collaboration to be able to educate and support the child's mental health and well-being. And the challenge with that is that there's not enough representation. I put my son and my daughter in therapy from when they were 4 or 5 years old. And the only therapist I could find was a white woman. And there was a constant fear every time I brought my children to therapy, because I felt like they're going to say something, because we're not perfect. You know, I say things that culturally seem appropriate, but may not seem appropriate for someone else who hears it. And instead of that being a conversation, that could be something that all of a sudden 51A is filed for neglect or whatever else. And DCF is not the friend of a Black and brown parent. It's oftentimes the enemy of a Black and brown parent, because statistics shows that children are oftentimes taken at a very, very much higher percentage from Black and brown families due to the lack of cultural awareness about how we raise our children and how we speak to our children, and lack of question asking, and more so responding or acting. So I think it's important to begin to build a sense of trust as well as representation in these different categories, whether it's with therapy or with agencies that are meant to support children. So that way the parents can have trust in these organizations and in these systems that are meant to support our children and having that mental health, mental wellness.
Thank you so much for sharing that information, Alba. I was wondering, could you segue into the ACEs, the evaluation? We learned about that in the documentary, and I was just wanting you to explain it and also include how it could be a useful tool for educators in our school district as a possibility for a solution.
So the ACEs is Adverse Childhood Events. It was a study that was done in California with the CDC and with Kaiser Permanente. I forget how you pronounce that, but and this showed that children who suffer from adverse childhood events are significantly at higher risk for not only behavioral things such as substance use disorder, cigarette smoking, and things of that nature, but also for cancer, diabetes, and heart disease as well. And there's a simple test that anybody can do online that just asks 10 questions. And these questions ask about that at an early age, have you experienced X, Y, or Z? And when I first went on there and did my own test, I realized like, okay, well, I check off a lot of these boxes. What does that mean? That means that now I can recognize the resilience and the strength that I have, but also know that I'm not a bad person, right? So some of these scenarios where children may be seen as a bad child or like acting out or defiant could actually be part of having these abnormal traumatic experiences that they have at a young age, which affect their neurons and their brains and how they function, as well as the stress response. So what happens is when you have a stressful situation and you have the fight or flight response, so when you constantly have somebody experiencing the fight or flight response, it no longer reacts the way it should. And that the hormones that are expressed during a stressful situation end up being hyperactivated. So that leads to increased risk for cancers and things of that nature. So it's a very difficult it's very simple to understand. And I think that the way that the test could be used is that if you realize that, so they say that if a person has a 4 or a higher, like a number 4 or higher, that they have like a 55% greater chance of getting X, Y, or Z, right? And then if they have a 5 or chance or higher, they actually have a greater chance of dying 20 years younger than the average person who doesn't have an ACEs score. So not only does it lead to lower death age, but also it leads to a lot of adverse events. So if we know what a person's risk score is, then we can be able to create like a interdisciplinary support system for that person that may include some education about what does this mean, what is the risk, and how can we provide the support, include guidance counselors at the table, include the parents at the table, so that we can provide wraparound services and support for that person, knowing that if they get that support early on, we may be able to prevent some of these things in the future.
Thank you so much. This question is for the audience and the panelists. Now, in the documentary, there was a clip where the girls were participating in an activity to list words or phrases that teachers, parents, peers, social media, etc. says about Black girls. I would like for the audience to take a few seconds to put that in the chat. Words or things that you hear people say about Black girls. One word, one phrase. And I'd like to ask the panel to share as well. And we will start with Thora.
I hear disrespectful a lot.
Mm-hmm. Alba?
Honestly, what really hit me was the word insubordinate, because the word insubordinate.
Insubordinate. Juan?
Loud, and that word bothers me for many reasons, because it limits, that word used to describe Black girls. It's as if we're not able to express ourselves, or we're not able to advocate for ourselves, but to the point that they make it seem as if being loud, like that's all they see us as being problematic people, and that's not the case.
Mm-hmm.
We're not afforded to have emotion, right? So that's what stands out in my mind when I hear that word. That's like a negative perception. So,
thank you. Eric?
Yes, the one word I guess was insubordination, but the overarching word for that would be discipline. And school my children attend, discipline is a key element of their mission statement. And I am retired United States military. I retired from the Navy, so I think I have a very decent understanding of what the word discipline means. And now, the story that Thora relayed to you guys, that was the weight that broke the camel. No teacher, Eric Henry stopped siding with teachers. Any illusions of grandeur that I was siding with teachers from that point ceased. And, it was both barrels loaded. I'm calling all of you guys on deck right now, because you need to explain to me what is discipline. And I lined up all from the assistant principal, it was about 10 of us in the room. And I asked them all, so what is your definition of discipline? And as the stories that relate to you, what was the teachable moment here for my child? What are you trying to relate to my child that's going to make them a better, productive person in society? And to a person, they all fail, because by any measure, even from a military measure, discipline is training, period. Anything beyond that is abuse. What is the teachable moment? How do they go from here? And I'm still on a low simmer, right? No, it's not even a low simmer. I'm pretty damn heated right about this, right? Still at this point.
Rightfully so. Thank you. Jennifer?
Mine would be the phrase calm down.
Mm.
I'm told to calm down, not to express something. And it's like in my head, I'm like, but I'm not up. I'm not heated. What is there? Why do I need to calm down? I'm in a neutral state right now. You don't want to see me hyped. I'm okay. I'm okay right now. So that calm down thing triggers me.
Same. I think, again, it goes back to we're not afforded to have emotions or responses like anybody else. And I think hearing, it's a way for me, I think about tone policing too. So it's like they say like, oh, you need to calm down, as if you don't have the right to have an emotion, or you don't have the right to express yourself, or the right to be angry about something. And so it's really a way, I feel like sometimes too, people gaslight by saying things like that as well. And it's frustrating. It's like, if I'm upset, I have that right to communicate it, but a lot of times we're not afforded that. We're too angry, or we're seen as a threat.
This is true. Now, it is important for us to recognize that our communities are holistic entities. We all share racial vulnerabilities. They sometimes play out differently across gender. What might the racial vulnerabilities look like or play out differently across male and female gender? Jennifer, would you like to take this on?
Okay. So I don't know if this answers your question, but what came to mind was, again, that thing I had said earlier about being invisible.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I have a lot of cousins, younger cousins, who want to go to the high school I went to because it's the good high school. And my fear, and I say this to everyone, it's different when you send a Black boy to an all-white school, because for many of them, their narrative is written for them, whether it's written through the media. Well, it comes from the media, but that young boy is either going to be the athlete, the class clown, right? The dumb one in class, right? Those are the roles that are given to him by his classmates, and many times by some of his teachers. Well, and I say to them, I tell parents, and relatives, I think it's even more dangerous to send a Black girl to an all-white school, because she then becomes invisible. She then does not fit in with the Black boy. He's the athlete. With the girl, what do we have? What are we? Who are we? We don't look like the girl that's on, the girl on TV, or the cheerleader, right? We don't look like the cheerleaders, right? We don't talk the same way. No one, many times we're not the ones that people want to date. In this, in high school, it's important. Those are social things that we don't fit into those realms. So you're spending 4 years of your developmental years not fitting in and being that invisible person in a school. And I find that to be detrimental, because not only are you not getting it in school, media reinforces that invisibility. And never mind if you're a dark-skinned Black girl. You know what I'm saying? The media does. I mean, as of recently, yeah, you see a lot of, dark-skinned actresses. But prior to that, if you weren't Holly Berry, whatever, she don't pay my bills. But if you're not Holly Berry, you know what I mean? Like, there was no chance for us, right? So you're just, there's wherever you go. I think that it's something that we need to take into consideration as parents, where we send our children, and as educators. So if you are that teacher, regardless of race, if you are that teacher and you notice that you have that Black child who is, the rare Black child, right? Then it is on you to make sure that that child is noticed, that child is seen, and that child is acknowledged. Because yes, the school does not represent you. Media will not represent you, but I will let you know that I see you in this class and you are valuable, and that you mean, you are worth. I know your worth, and I'm going to add some tax to it. And I think that's what we, we need to do for our children.
Thank you.
Something to that. And the challenge, I think, specifically with young Black girls is also the adultification and sexualization of our bodies at a very young age. A lot of that has to do with our genetics and our culture, and we cannot control that. But I do think that oftentimes growing up, there was a set standard where there would be a dress code, but because the white girl didn't have a body to fill in the short shorts or the short skirt that was above the line, then she could get away with it. Whereas the young Black girl, if she came in with something that was right on the cusp, was told that she needed to go home or she needed to change. And I think that that's just one example of how oftentimes school systems doesn't necessarily abide by the same structure or the same rules for different children who have different body parts, because it doesn't necessarily understand the fact that it's like that she can't control. And even if she's only like 10 or 11 or 12 years old, she can't control the body that she has. It is what it is. And the hypersexualization of children, of young girls and their bodies is also very dangerous in many aspects, whether it's from their own parents or their own household telling them to, well, don't dress like this around this person, or don't do this. It's like, the girls are always told to control themselves as opposed to the boys control how they interact with the girls. And I think that's oftentimes very much bias. And oftentimes there's family sexual trauma that does exist. And instead of speaking about the reality and the truth of the matter, oftentimes the child is left voiceless, and the family is oftentimes kind of unknowingly siding with the abuser by not speaking up and outing that person. Like, where we should shame that person for what he did, as opposed to staying silent about something that everyone in the family knows that something happened or something went wrong. So I think that some of these things that exist, which oftentimes just kind of the stigma and the way that we communicate with our young girls and the way that we expect them to behave themselves or to conduct themselves accordingly around someone who may not have the same standards or have the same reaction. Also, because he's a boy, boys will be boys will do that. So I think that is another challenge that young Black girls experience on different aspects, not just in the school, but sometimes even in their own homes. That is very challenging.
Oh, very helpful insight. Eric, would you like to say anything about the vulnerability on the male perspective of what that might look like?
Yeah, I think what I'm listening to the commentary here, and I'm flashing back to 2 years ago around this time. We were on a family vacation, went on a cruise, and my children, my daughters, the triplets were 12 years old, still around 12 years old at this time. And I, as a man, when you notice other grown men looking at your child as they are something other than 12 years old, you have to have a conversation with your daughter. And it's not to say that you are doing something wrong, but it's more of, this is who you are. You need to be aware of what is going on. And this is, you need to be, in tune to what you're surrounded, because you're a child. You are not supposed to be as worldly as your father is, who was in the Navy for 20 years and been in 30 different countries. You're not supposed to be at that stage in your life. But I am, and I'm, it's my job to be able to make you aware of these things. So it happens. It's unfortunate that it happens, but we need the village. We need a village. I know we as parents, I think we do admirable, decent enough jobs, but we don't see everything. We certainly don't know everything. But that doesn't mean that we're not amenable to learning. So please help you. If you see something, say something, as the saying goes.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate your responses, and we are coming to nearing the close of our questions, and we're going to open up for question and answers from our audience. But before we do that, I want to ask one final question. Based on what you've learned from the documentary, are there any other thoughts or reflections, lasting words that you would like to share with the audience on how we can do something about stopping the experiences that our Black girls are having in schools? We'd like this conversation to continue.
Documentary
Yes.
as often as we can.
Thank you. And we'll make sure that it's available at the library. And also there's a book, PUSHOUT, available at the library that folks can get access to. Yes, Eric?
I'd like to echo what Alba said. As a matter of fact, I have a niece who's an educator in the Needham public school system, and now lo and behold, they're finally being asked to sit at the table, and frankly, she expresses her frustration in the fact that now, first of all, now you're asking me these things, and she then, when she does respond, she gets the pushback of let's take it slowly. And in our conversation with her last night, I'm like, I'm listening to you, and I'm first thing that's coming to my mind is the letter from Martin Luther King from the Birmingham jail, when he was all by all the ministers, they're telling him to wait. Wait means never. Slow means never. We've been going slow all of this time, and that means never. So, and I tell her as an educator, what you should, in my opinion, what you should be doing is expressing to you. It's a flawed social construct for them to approach it at this level. You should have them to watch, and you can use my Malden library card. You should queue up PUSHOUT for these educators and have them sit there, because the bottom line, if they learn how to treat Black girls, they will know how to treat their Black peers. For them to approach it, and first of all, to try to put a carrot out there to say we want to do something, but let's slow down. So I'm like, so what is your definition of slow? But learn how to. If you treat my child right, you will in turn treat me right.
And I hear you saying that there's definitely a sense of urgency. I'd like to hear briefly from Juan and also Thora before we open the Q&A, and Jen.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's, I totally agree. I think, showing this documentary, I also think really having a larger conversation with all educators in Malden, and just talking about what does it mean to be a culturally responsive educator for our students, and like how can we ensure that all students, our teachings and our everyday work that we do, that we're making it inclusive of our teachings coming from one that's a multicultural framework, but also how do we ensure that all of our students are feeling safe in the classroom and feeling like they can be heard and supported as well. And aside from that aspect, from what we do for our students, but it goes back to recruitment too. So like, how can we get more teachers of color, BIPOC educators, and how can we not only recruit them, how can we retain them, how can we support them, how can we give them the supports they need to add value to the school curriculum in a way that allows students to like fully learn and understand from all angles and all levels. I think it's important.
And Thora, if you could say something to your school for change, what would that be? What would that message look like?
I would say to speak up. I mean, if you see something wrong And I mean, even if you feel out of place for saying something, even though you know it's wrong, say something, because you saying something is taking a step in the right direction. And you taking a minute out of your time to say something, if you see something's wrong, you could have just helped. You could have just de-escalated a whole situation from starting into such a big flame that didn't need to be that big. So you have a voice, use it. Your voice is something, it's a God-given thing. Use your voice. It's there to help people. It's there for you to advocate for people. So speak up and speak out when you hear something. Don't shy away, which I'm still learning to not shy away. I'm still learning to find my voice, but the more and more I try, the more I find my voice, and it's going to help no matter what.
We appreciate you using your voice in the way that you have here today with us. So thank you for that. And Jen?
I thought she was the last one. Okay. So I'd say that, in addition to hiring more teachers of color and what have you, the immediate that right now is that's not going to happen, right? So I would say that we need to find a way and find space where the current teachers, before they can become culturally, what was the terminology you used, Guan?
Responsive
Responsive
educators. Yep.
Yeah, before any of these teachers can do that, I think we have to have a space where teachers can talk about race and talk about their own their lack of knowledge, their insecurities, their questions, somewhere where there's a space where I can ask the questions, I can speak, and things could be addressed. There could be some clarification, because if that doesn't happen first, then it's all fake. And the kids, they're the recipient of this, right? And kids are good at reading our nonsense, and they can tell if we're genuine or not. So I think before any of that, it would be to the advantage of the adults and to the students if the teachers would be given that that space to talk.
Thank you all for your wonderful responses and very helpful and insightful direction. I do believe that there is a sense of urgency here for more work to be done and for this conversation to continue so that we can bring forth change to the lives of our Black and Brown youth. We are now open for the question and answer portion of this event. So if you have questions, please put it in the queue or in the chat box. Any other lasting impressions? Okay. Q&A. It's open. I don't see any questions. I'm sure there are questions, responses, reflections out there that would like to be shared. Listen to the voices of the youth. Someone wants to know, Eric, they might have missed this, but did the school respond in the way you felt helped?
No. Karen, they did not. As a matter of fact, we had a big meeting with everyone. I invited their civil rights advocate to participate. So I know that the message should have, and I also invited the director to participate. He chose not to. We had several meetings and things. We shut down the meetings and went on Thanksgiving break, and it was intended to continue after Thanksgiving, and the school went completely dark. To the point I heard nothing from them. I heard no response from the civil rights person. I tried to attend several Board of Trustees meetings that they conveniently were and did not happen on the posted times. So no, I did not. And one of the basic things that started, and Thor is just, I have 3 children there. Thor is getting the brunt of this, but it kind of the same teacher was the focal point of another really egregious incident for my part is that she for almost a whole quarter in the Power School portal, where teachers and parents and the kids can interact with their teacher and their grades, she misspelled my son's name. This is something that you touch multiple times a week, and how is it that you're going to misspell my son's name? This is the first thing that was given to my child in life, and you are going to disrespect this. And as an enslaved people, this is the first thing other than from our freedom that was taken from us. And this continues to this day. My son name specifically is being misspelled. I'm just building the case. It's ongoing for me. It is not. I initially started this off to say that you owe my son and my family an apology, none of which happened. And so it is still ongoing as far as I'm concerned. Unresolved, unsatisfied. Not at all. It's not. Thank you, Karen, for asking.
We have a question from Karen McDonald. Thank you so much for being here and sharing. Given how much of these problems are rooted in trauma, what would a trauma-informed response to things that are now treated as discipline problems look like? Jennifer Buon.
I'd go to Alba on this one.
Okay.
So the biggest thing that we can do when it comes to providing trauma-informed support is to get trauma-informed training. And the trauma-informed training not only goes into really understanding the ACEs, but really understanding the fact that as individuals, we all have our traumas, and traumas can lead to triggers. So how do you know that what you're doing is a trigger for that person? You don't know unless you ask. You don't know unless you pay attention to the cues, right? So there are so many different ways to interpret or to understand triggers. And it's important to just respect people's boundaries and people's differences. And one of the basic things that I have been able to learn to really be able to provide a more trauma-informed way of caring is understanding that not everybody is a hugger, right? For some people, you give them a hug, they tense up and they're like, oh my God, like, why are you doing this to me? And they hold their breath for that moment. So there are simple things that we can do to pay attention and to respect someone else's boundaries, someone else's differences, someone else's way of experiencing this experience, right? Because there's no way that we can prevent someone from being triggered altogether, because we can't read their minds. We can't understand what is versus what isn't a trigger for this person. But what we can do is we can understand and respect boundaries and questions instead of assuming that this is an appropriate way to respond to this person. Let me touch this person. This person may not want to be touched.
And to add on to that, I also think that the relationship between the teacher and the student, you need to have rapport. Yep. You know what I mean? That sense of rapport, you know where that student is coming from, would definitely go a long way. And to ask the questions why. You don't just look at the behavior, find out why this person is behaving in this way. You just keep asking why to get to that point, as opposed to looking at it as a disciplinary action that needs to be taken.
And one other thing to say too is that when someone is expressing something that they're experiencing or their story, it's very important to believe them, and it's very important to not turn it into an interrogation process where you're putting them through court, where they feel like they need to prove something or that you're trying to catch them up on something, because oftentimes that's something that we do as adults is we'll feel the need to know more and more and more. It's like, what is this person willing to share right now that feels safe for that person? And how can we take that for what this person says. I believe you, and you don't have to go into any more details or anything like that. And then there's also one other thing that is just very important to just be sensitive and mindful of when it comes to trauma or expressing trauma. It is that no one really likes to be looked at as poor you. So for me, for example, I'm a survivor of sexual trauma. So when I say that my sexual trauma started when I was 3 years old, if someone says, oh, I'm so sorry for you, oh, that's so sad, and they have this like heartbroken reaction, it makes me want to hold that truth to myself, because you can't handle my truth. You can't handle what I experienced, which is my story. It is too much for you. And therefore, I'd rather keep it to myself. So that way I'm not going around giving that guilt and that sadness to other people, as well as the, wow, I can't believe that. So it's like sometimes that silence is golden. So if you don't have a response that, you know, if you'd rather be safe and not do something that could make the person feel worse or sad or like their story is too much, just be silent. Just sit in that moment and allow that person to share how they feel, and not add any additional, like don't add your feelings into that, which could potentially make the person kind of retract.
Thank you for that.
Erga, I do see a couple of questions building up in the Q&A section.
Feel free to ask because mine is moving. I know that there was a question about, since Ohio is doing really positive work with the girls, how can we replicate that here in Malden District Public Schools? I think a lot of it has to do with resources and making those available and having the funding to do so, and for it to be a priority for our district to see that there's a need and to find ways to fund the solution. Does anyone else have anything that they might want to add to that?
I can say briefly, Erga, that I did with the Ohio model. I believe that was what there was. Several of the girls were showing up with all the great things that they're doing. I would be awesome to construct a model that, you know, the commonality of those kids was that they were rejected in another environment. They had to fight or whatever, had adverse situations that got them into a positive environment. We need to change that construct if we're going to build out this model and have it that it is nurturing from the onset and not as a reactionary sort of thing, being proactive about it from the onset.
Absolutely, and training as well. Any other questions that you can see that I probably can't right now?
Yes, Erga, I see one from Pastor Emily Hamilton. If creating the space for educators, especially white educators, to talk about race is not something the district is willing to do in a timely or well-resourced manner, is it something the community could provide? How could we work to help our educators get where they need to be?
So I think that is, it's something that one has to have a willingness and a desire to do, right? Because many times the district offers the professional developments, but they're optional. So you get to sign up for the ones you want to go to. And it's usually the same people who sign up for these types of trainings. So the problem would be, even if it was something that was done by the community, it would still be the same people signing up for the trainings. I think it has to be, you know, I'm not an admin or anything, but I just feel like when it comes to like special education, as educators, we're all forced to go to those trainings, right? Because they affect a population, right? So I think it would be something where diversity, race training, it's not just about Black and brown. It's for the betterment of all our students, right? We are all enriched by interacting with one another, by being educated by one another. So it would be something that had to be mandatory. And, you know, that question is it something that districts are brave enough to do? And then the problem when it comes to race, when you mandate these trainings, you'll have 800 teachers and you know, one guest speaker. And I think that model in and of itself is wrong. It needs to be smaller groups, because we're talking about something that it makes a lot of people, a lot of teachers uncomfortable to talk about race. So the setting needs to be a smaller setting where it's more intimate, where I can be vulnerable and not feel like the rest of the world is going to judge me. After all, we are humans, we have feelings. And when I feel attacked, I shut down. So it needs to be, you know, it needs to be something that is thought of thoroughly and done systematically. And I don't know, it's, even if the community offers it, it will be the same people who attend. That's just my take on it.
I think there needs to be buy-in to everyone, for everyone. And if we stay student-centered and child-oriented, it's more likely that folks will have more of an open mind and an open heart to step into the discomfort that you mentioned about talking about issues around race, what microaggressions look like, and the macro impacts that they have on folks. I know, talking with Thora about some of her experiences, she mentioned the impact of how she was treated in school. And I'm grateful that she was able to share her story, but if she could talk a little bit more about that with us, just so that we can hear from a child's voice and a child's perspective of what the impact of treatment looks like, that would be really helpful.
Yes. For me, I know it's different for everyone, but for me, I really started to degrade myself. I started to put myself down. I started to tell myself, like, oh, what could I have done? Or, oh, maybe my teacher's right, it is my fault. Even though, like, you know, deep down, you know it's not your fault, but you're just trying to please everyone else and say it's your fault or make it seem like everything's okay. It's like, yeah, sure, I'll take the blame. But I started to degrade myself. I had really low self-esteem. I started dreading my classes. I was like, I don't want to go to school. I don't want to. He's like, what if I just skip this one class and stayed in the bathroom all day? Or what if I just, you know, go to this class and then I run out of school, you know, towards the end of the day, so I wouldn't have to talk to anyone, or I wouldn't have to be stopped by the office like last week or something like that. It's just, you start to look at yourself differently, and you're saying, okay, what about me is wrong that is making said person treatment like this? Or what about my actions is causing this? So it's almost like you think it's a cause and effect situation when it truly isn't. It's just misunderstanding most of the time. Or it's just, you know, teacher against student, where it's obviously the teacher is going to outweigh student. But, you know, I just look down on myself. I mean, I never get used to, but I just looked down on myself. I wasn't happy. To be completely honest, I wasn't happy. And it hurt. It really hurt. But once again, I'd put on my tough face and I'd be a big macho person and be like, oh, everything's fine. Or you just hide it to hold it to yourself. Because, you know, it came to the point where I was like, if I speak out about this, no one's going to believe me, because it's like a set expectation that a parent's, you know, words go over students or their child's, or a student is below teachers. You're more inclined to believe the adult, where you aren't getting the student's perspective. And even if you are getting the student's perspective, you are more inclined to believe the adult because they know more. It's just those stereotypes being outweighed, where it's, you're putting yourself down to the point where it's trying to bring yourself to the standards of other people. And that's what I was doing. And it just dug a real deep hole for me. I'm still, you know, working my way out of it day by day, but it's so degrading for yourself. It's saddening. It's just, you feel so many emotions with it. It's horrible, but yeah.
Can I add to that? I mean, sorry, Virga, but so what she's experiencing and what so many other children experience, and then we wonder why we don't have teachers of color. Who wants to come back to that? Who wants to go back into a profession that made me feel like this during my K to 12? And for many districts, you're not going to pay me. Like, something has to change, right? Because I'm not going to go back to the trauma. I'm not going to 9 to 5, the trauma with no pay. So just putting it out there that we can't bring people in if they are having negative experiences as children. They will not return as adults.
Thank you. Juan, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I'm just thinking about, moving forward in the sense of how can we not only continue this conversation, but also lay the foundation to create like steps so that way we can ensure that our students, aren't having to have these experiences going forward. And I heard earlier about mandating training, which I think is important. And I think that's definitely a strong step. Because, in higher ed, where I'm at right now, Lesley University, we had to mandate a lot of training. And it was met with a lot of resistance. And even within that level of resistance, there was a conversation, why were people feeling uncomfortable about making certain things like diversity or talking about inclusion initiatives for our students and for the community? Why is it always constantly being met with resistance? But I also think one thing, I don't know if it was said earlier, I just stepped away for a second, but one thing is that it has to start at the top. Leaders, people that are in, positions to really create change, it has to start there and getting them to really get on board. But also too, they have to really provide resources and support. So, if we're going to have conversations moving forward, which I would hope, to really ensure that we're, holding, people accountable to create these spaces for our children, that there's supports for that. I think what I don't want to see is that, we close up, we were 2 minutes, into ending this event, and then it's back to normal. Right. And so students are still having to continue dealing with what they're dealing with teachers in the classroom, being mistreated, being devalued. Like, that happens a lot. And I really think, I push to say that, not only just us as educators, but also like administration, the city, looking at the city of Malden, like, what are we doing to really ensure, and I'm seeing comments about anti-racism work and, what can we do at the community level? I mean, we can rally, we can mobilize, we can do all that. But if those that are in those positions that are there, administration there to create change, and they're not seeing or trying to understand or trying to support, we're going to constantly be running into resistance often. So I just say I put it on city, the city to really step up and really think about how we can, create more ongoing conversation, providing supports, providing us, like I said, providing supports for our children, big time.
Thank you for that. So Isabel is asking, in our opinion, how does the presence of a school resource officer in the Malden Public Schools impact Black and Brown students?
I have a mixtape view on that. So if I was given the job as the high school resource officer, I think that many students would be okay with that and would look forward to that, right? And the difference is because I have a relationship with them. Uniform or no uniform, I have a relationship with the community, right? And I think that's something that our resource officers need to have, not just come into police, but to build a relationship with the students, right? It doesn't always have to be about power struggle. It could be a mentorship. It would be a positive role model. There's more to it. I don't need to be the resource officer who's don't do this, right? I could be that resource officer who's, how are you? Oh, you need references. You need, what I'm saying? Like, I can be a positive motivating force in that student's life. So again, it's the way that they come in. It's a relationship that, my principal says it's a relationship that saves. So it's a relationship that the resource officer, and you see this thing, it's not just a resource officer, it could be the teacher. The teacher has the same effect as a resource officer. So it's just the adult in the building. It is a relationship that they build with the students that matter, whether you have a uniform or you don't have a uniform. So I think that's my take on the resource officers in the school. It's a relationship, whether the resource officer is Black, white, Asian, Latinx, it's a relationship that they are able to build or not build with the community.
Eric, did you want to share something on that piece?
Actually, I was just I was going to ask a couple of the other questions, or try to ask a couple of other questions to in the Q&A and responding to that. But if I could just read another question I can take another question. Read the question.
I just want to announce that it is now 4:00. So I just wanted to let everyone know, and I am okay if everyone else on the panel is okay for another question. Okay, go ahead.
This is from Martha, and the question goes like this. I know that social workers and counselors in the schools can make great gains with children who have trauma issues, but a lot of times the people on the front lines, like teachers, paraprofessionals, substitute teachers, and other staff, don't have the tools to know what motivates a certain behavior and have to focus on classroom or group management. What advice would you give for this group? I would yield to Alba.
Alba has stepped away.
Okay, then I
yes.
will take Jennifer next. And then Juan.
Before we go that route, I just would like to jump in. I think training should also include paraprofessionals. I'm not sure if they are a part of the training opportunities that are afforded to other educators. Jennifer, please correct me. Are paraprofessionals included in those training opportunities?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay, just to be able to make that available. And if they do feel that there are certain areas that they need more training in, to be able to ask whoever the department head or supervisor or manager is to inquire about that. I think if there's an issue, a problem, or you need support, to be able to access the support that you need. It's just a matter of asking. That's just the thought. Juan, could you?
For me, I'm just thinking about, and I apologize if I'm stepping away from the question, but like just really thinking about what next, right? Like how can we commit going forward? Like what can we do? And I know I've seen people ask this question, but just really thinking about like how can we, all of us, including City of Malden, like what can we do to, support, our youth, right? And that's what stands out for me right now. So just trying to really think about like what can I do on my end, and thinking about how can we support these kids so that they don't feel like that. And I keep going back to, and I like the point about how there needs to be conversations, but we need to really allocate more time and funding for these, conversations, and really looking at what are we doing currently, and how can we make things better, and how would that benefit all of our students? So just leave it at that.
Thank you, folks. Please let us not forget Thora's experience, and there's so many other stories and experiences that we're not made aware of, that has not been voiced and is not on the table, but these things are happening. Now that we know, it's what are we going to do? And I hear you, Juan, and the conversation needs to continue, but with conversation, we need action, and we do need funding. Thank you all for being here today with us, unpacking this documentary and what's happening. I'm hoping that we can come together to bring forth change, to better the lives of our Black and brown girls out there and boys, because they are the future, and we need to try to build them up instead of tearing them down. and just believe them when they say that they're hurting, believe them, or look for the nonverbal signs and ask for support if you need the support. But these students and their families depend on educators to better their situation, to educate their children and not to hurt them. So I do appreciate everyone's presence today. Thank you so much. Does anybody have any lasting words before we close? Thank you, Malden Public Library, for making this happen. Thank you, Malden core members who work behind the scenes, Susan, Cecilia, appreciate you, and thank you, community, for coming together with us to have this conversation and to learn and let change happen. Thank you all. Enjoy the rest of your days and be safe.